looking for. Type of rain tanks. So there's several different types of rain tanks to choose from. As you can see in this photo, we have a simple little rain barrel. We got the culvert style rain tanks. We got the plastic style rain tanks. Those are the common ones. The less common is what you will see is this is the ferro cement tank. The ferro cement tank is made out of rebar and chicken wire and a mud mixture, a cement mixture basically. And you're mixing that together and you're pushing it through that, through the chicken wire. Typically there needs to be a brace on the inside or some holding that mud from coming through the chicken wire. So it's very, it's labor intensive. However, if you're building a tank, this is the least expensive tank that you can build unless you're paying for labor. Then it's the most expensive tank that you could build because it is very labor intensive. Underground. So this is underground tanks. They're again, not as common here, especially in the valley, but if you don't have the space above ground, below ground is definitely where to think. So for example, this is an option that you can have. It's called aqua blocks. Aqua blocks are very similar to, well, they remind me of like a milk crate, but it has all this structural support on the inside. So once this is done, basically you're creating a pond liner, you're putting all this blocks inside, creating those void space where the water could go into. And then a pump's going to be required to get the water out. Okay, so that's one thing about underground tanks is we are going to have a pump to get the water out versus an above ground tank, we can use gravity. So, but definitely if you don't have enough space for an above ground tank, think about below ground. The cost is definitely going to be higher because you're going to have to dig, get that hole for the underground tank. So there's that cost and depending on how hard of a dig it is. So, but for the example on this scenario, there's aqua blocks that are structural and non-structural. So if you get the structural, you literally can park an RV over that. But if they're non-structural, don't do that. So make sure that you're getting the right blocks if that's the direction you're going. But there's also plastic tanks now that are rated for underground, fiberglass tanks. So lots of different options that you have out there for tanks for underground now. Okay, rain barrels versus rain tanks. So the rain tanks, I'll just start, if you're wanting to capture more than 50 gallons, start thinking about a tank to a cistern. The barrels, 50 gallons, well, we do call them the training wheels because that's a good way to get started. However, you'll notice once it starts to rain, and especially if it's a large square foot area, those 55-gallon barrels, it's going to really fill up quick. And even if you daisy chain them together, they're going to fill up quick. So you're not necessarily going to capture as much as you could if you size the tank to fit at least 1 inch cumulative or 2 inch or more. So on the barrels, you can meet some plant water needs, but with the tank, you're going to be able to meet more of the water needs because you're going to, well, basically have more capacity. So when thinking about a barrel or a tank, barrels, great way to get started, but once, especially after we go through this class today and you start realizing the potential of how much you can harvest, that's when tanks start to make more sense. So definitely getting above that 300,000 or more. And then stacking functions of the tanks. So as we learned, water harvesting principle number 7, stacking functions. Every element we put into our design should serve more than just one function. So a rain tank is going to hold water, we know that. The tank is going to help water our landscape, okay? But it could work as a privacy shield, help with noise, a trellis. You could make it into art. What other things can you do with it? So think about stacking functions when you're installing your tanks. How could you create art out of it? What you're seeing here, these are the culvert style rain tanks. The culvert style rain tanks are, well, they're galvanized steel, and that, personally, I like that look, but they do take paint quite well. And so you can paint them up, make them look artistic. You can also paint them to match your building, so they just blend in to the environment as well. To inspire to you. I love this. This is they're at the Living Lab in Tucson. A 10,000-gallon underground tank captures water, then it gets pumped up and out to the landscape and also into the building. And so if you're going to pump the water into a building, filtration definitely has to happen, because in order to drink the water, we got to make sure that it's clean and healthy for us. So the right filtration is going to depend on what's in your rainwater. But the pump and all the mechanisms to make that happen, it definitely gets more technical, but it's an option that you have. You can plumb your rain tank so that way it comes into your house when you do laundry, it's using your rainwater. When you're, for your drinking water, once it's filtered, and then it can go out to the landscape as gray water. And also, if it doesn't need to go in the house, don't have it so you can bypass and go to the landscape so it doesn't go through all that filtration. Because for the landscape, that's your filter. But definitely for indoor use, you're going to have to use filters. All right. Okay, Starbucks, they're definitely doing their part. It's not what I wanted to show you in this photo. I want to show you the type of tank that they're using. So the type of tank, it's built like a big granary. And you'll see where those bolts and the seams, if there wasn't that liner, so a felt liner to help protect, and then the potable grade liner that goes inside that, that's what makes it a watertight vessel. So that's important. And plus there's a little, chance of it starting to rust. So they put in a piece of metal that is going to erode away first. So when thinking about that condensation that happens between the layers and the metal. So, but definitely a good system. Another point I wanted to point out, another part I want to point out is how the water gets to the tank. So you can see, let me see if I can get my pointer going here. Okay. So from the roof over to the top of the tank, that's the inflow line right there. So when thinking about a type of installation for your tank, there's a couple options. One, it's a dry install, also known as a top feed. But a dry install, the rain's going to come through the gutter, down, gets filtered through the rain head for any leaves, and it's also for mosquito vector control. The water will go down and then into the tank. When the tank's full, it's going to go through the overflow pipe and out to the landscape. Okay, so but there's no water left in that pipe. That pipe's going to be dry, making it a dry install. And this is great when the tanks can be relatively close to the building, or if you could do a above head pipe with some support. But another option is to do a wet install. And this is going to allow you to position your tank further away from the collection source. So it doesn't have to be right by your house. It could be 10, 20, 30, 60 feet away from your house or the catchment source, as long as you have what's called vertical drop. And that's the rain head to where the overflow or inflow is. Now, in this illustration, what we're seeing here, this is a built-in place culvert style tank. So the plumbing's a little different than what you would see in a plastic style tank, because in a built-in place tank, you're going to put all the plumbing inside the tank from the bottom. And so when I use the water level will go down to the height of the supply line. Okay. So that's where I'm connecting the hose bib, turning on the water, using the rainwater in the tank. And when I reach to that level of the supply line, the tank is empty, but there will still be water in the pipe. Okay. That makes it a wet install. So for example, on a plastic tank, the plumbing doesn't come in from underneath. The plumbing would go up along the side of the tank and into the tank up top. Then you'll have water in that pipe all the way from the inflow to where the same elevation is into the pipe. That's the inflow for the rain tank. So advantage of a of a wet install is you can site the tank further away from the collection source, but this vertical drop from the bottom of the rain head to the inflow or overflow, that's required so that way the rainwater has time to move through that pipe. So as rainwater, it's basically the weight, it's pushing that water down and up into the tank, and that's going to take a little bit of time for it. So having that vertical drop is going to give the water time to go through the pipe, that friction, go through the 90 degrees or in all the different elbows that you might have and into the tank. So the more friction that you have or the longer pipe, the more vertical drop that you'll need. Okay, this is a culvert style tank being built. And what you're seeing here over on the screen, there's your rain head. And as I mentioned, that's your first line of defense for any leaf, but definitely vectors. So rodents, we don't want them getting into our rainwater in our tanks. Mosquitoes, we definitely don't want to be breeding mosquitoes. So a rain head is required to have on there, so that way you're getting your vector control and your first leaf debris filter. Then what you'll see of this pipe coming down, this pipe is called the first flush. And the reason for the first flush is the water on your roof between our storms, well, the first little bit of water is going to be somewhat dirty because it's washing off the roof. We're going to have maybe some bird poop and some dust. So that first flush is going to capture that. And then when the first flush is full, it will go over and down, underground, and into the tank. And that's what you see in this, there's this pipe, and there's also an overflow pipe. This pipe here is going to be the flush to empty the tank if needed. And this pipe here is the supply line. So all that plumbing gets in place before you set the tank. Okay. And once you set the tank, you gotta let the concrete dry. Then you're gonna get in there and you're gonna paint it with some type of material that's going to make it a watertight vessel. So Flex or Blue Max or some kind of rubberized material that could be potable grade. You're gonna wanna paint the seams because everywhere there's a seam, that's where water will leak out. And you're also gonna paint the bottom of the tank. So all the concrete gets painted. You could paint the entire tank on the inside with that potable grade rubberized material. But you don't have to if you're not trying to get a potable grade tank. So just the seams for sure, so that way it doesn't leak. Okay. So when thinking about different rain tanks, I want to show you several different options of tanks. So we just looked at the culvert style. The culvert style, it's built in place. So you're going to pour the concrete, you're going to do all that plumbing all in place. Now, the tanks I'm going to show you they are constructed tanks that you're going to drop in place. And so you'll see here, this is a Texas metal tank. It is from Texas. They come in stainless steel or galvanized. So the tank itself is already built. You're going to place it on top of a pad. Inside of the tank is a liner, just like the one that you saw with the Starbucks. Okay. The gray pipe that you see here, this is the inflow pipe. Okay. So with that inflow pipe, that's the water coming from the roof, underground, over to the tank. You would think, oh, wait a minute, there's a gutter over here. That's not where the water is coming from. The water is coming from the house, which is about 30 feet away from the tank. Okay. And then when the tank is full, it's got an overflow. This overflow pipe is going to go down, underground, and then into the basin. Be good to always plan for your overflows on your rain tank. So just like our earthworks, you got to plan for an overflow because that tank's going to fill up. And if it fills up and overflows and you haven't designed an overflow, where's that water going to go? So that's where we learned week one, best small and simple way to start is with the earthworks. Shape your earth to slow spread and sink that rainwater. And then when you install your rain tank, it's a no-brainer where your overflow goes. It goes to your earthworks. And then you're also going to want to put a vector control on the end of that overflow pipe. a pop-up emitter or black water flow preventer. So that way rodents can't get back into the rain tank and mosquitoes. This is another style tank. This is a plastic style tank. Things I want to show you in this photo is this little metal box. So I get asked a lot, well, I have these like things coming off the roof, the water just comes shooting out. Those are called scuppers. And so in order to get that water to be diverted down into a rain head, a scupper box, a box that's going to mount over that scupper to help direct that water down. So a scupper box, and then your rain head. And the water goes over to the tank. In this scenario, there's no first flush. And the first flushes are optional. So back when first starting out, first flushes, it's pretty common. We were going to install them because that's the most that the filtration that you can get before we get into the tank. And that does make sense if you're going to use an irrigation system with microfilters. If you're going to drink the water, definitely the more filtration that you can get out of it. But if it's just for your landscape, that first flush is optional. However, you may need to clean out your tank more often. So that sediment might start building up in your tank. So the water comes through into the tank, and then you have your overflow. Notice the size of that overflow pipe and the size of the inflow pipe. The pipes are the same size in diameter, and that's important. If you have a 3-inch inflow, you better have a 3-inch overflow, because if you only have a 1-inch or 2-inch overflow and you got all this water coming in and the tank's full and we're getting one of those heavy downpours, where's that water going to go? It's going to come shooting out of that 1-inch overflow, but it's going to likely start popping out of the lid. It might start backflowing, coming up the rain head. So size your overflows to match your inflows. Okay. So in the photo here, what I want to show, these are 2 Bushman tanks. These are the 1,110 gallon tanks. What's nice about this tank is it's very low profile. So this is, gosh, only about 4'8" to the top. So below a 5-foot wall, you can hide them for screening. But what I want to show for the Bushman tanks, and well, for most tanks, just look to see what the installation requires. But for example, for the Bushman, it could go on sand, it could go on crushed rock, it could go on cement. Now, cement obviously would be ideal, however, it's not needed. And if you have crushed rock that you can tamp, but personally, I like that sand. It's, well, a crushed rock, if there's anything sharp over time, that's a concern. So personally, I like to use a sand base or really well compacted quarter minus. Building an earthen berm around these would be helpful. And so, for example, what you could do before placing your tank to build your pad, you can dig your earth, and you're going to make your pad about 1 foot in diameter, larger than the tank. On these 1,100 gallon tanks, they're 7 foot wide. So I'm going to make my circle 8 foot wide, and I'm going to dig out about 1 inch or so of the soil. I'm going to take that soil and I'm going to build up a ring around that 8-foot circle. And then I'm going to fill that ring of sand, maybe about 2 inches of sand. I'm going to tamp that down really well. So I've got my earthen berm that's holding the sand in, and then the tank sets on the sand. So that makes a good solution. Another thing I want to point out in this photo is how the tanks are connected together. So this is the inflow pipe. Water flows into the tank. And then over here is the overflow pipe. So first tank overflows to second tank. Now that's a good solution, but a better solution, or in addition to this solution, is connecting the tanks together at the bottom. So in the Bushmans, they're going to have a 2-inch bulkhead at the bottom where you can connect a 2-inch pipe or a 1-inch pipe from one tank to the other. So when the tanks fill up, they're going to fill, the second tank will fill slower because it's not as large diameter as the first inflow tank. However, it's going to catch up to it and it's going to balance out. So after the storm, then that water is going to balance out. And the good thing about connecting them at the bottom is to get the water out of the tank, which is what we call a supply line. You only need one, because I can put one hose bib supply line on a tank and open it up, and both tanks are going to drain at the same. Okay. So connecting the tanks at the bottom is a good solution. Having that overflow from one tank to the top is good. But what I'd like to see is the first tank in the series have the overflow. So that way, if there's any problems, any debris clogging that up, it's on the first tank. It's not going from one tank to the other tank. Overflow is so important. So we want to make sure that, that we're not causing any issues and where that overflow water can't get out. Right, elevation. So as I mentioned with above ground tanks, gravity is important. And to get that water out, if we have a little bit more elevation than just at grade level, we're going to get more head pressure. And head pressure, that's, and on the height, has nothing to do with the width of the tank. It's all about the height of the tank. And so when the tank is full, you're going to have more head pressure than when the tank is empty. So when the tank is full and you turn on a hose, you're likely going to have pretty good pressure coming out of the hose. But when the tank is close to empty, you might not be getting any water hardly at all out of that, especially if it's a 100-foot hose that you're dragging out. So by elevating your tank, that's going to give you some more elevation, some more head pressure. What I like about this photo and what I want to show, and this is important, that if you're building up a pad, the tank doesn't set on the structure. The tank should set on the surface material that's inside the structure. And so that way, if the tank it starts to expand, we don't want it to be on some concrete pad halfway and then onto the surface material. We want it all to be on the same material. Another thing I want to show on this photo is a creative way of getting those scuppers. So this is an alternative to a scupper box right there. So that water coming out of the scupper goes down pipe, and then this one's going to connect, and there's our rain head right here. Now this rain head, it's a good rain head. It's filtering the leaves. It's vector control. The only thing that I personally don't like about this one is I can't see it. I want to see when it's dirty. I want to see when I'm reminded, I got to clean that. I got to rake that the debris off. So there are screens that or rain heads that don't have that lid. Another thing, this overflow pipe coming down, I'd like to see it if it had another 90 and then braced to the wall and then underground. So that's so that we don't want to create any tripping hazards or create anything that's going to be problematic. That's so if we can attach and just firm up that overflow, that would be good. Plastic style tanks, they're definitely one of the easiest tanks to install because they're light. You can move them around. Like for example, this little 865 gallon tank, I think it's under 200 pounds. So to be able to lift and move that, a few people, get it onto your pad. Definitely the plastic tanks are easier to install, and they're likely going to be less expensive than your other tank styles as well. And so kind of that rule of thumb, basically about $1 a gallon for a rain tank, plastic style. But then there's your plumbing, everything that's going to go with it as well. Okay, critical features. Of course, we want to make sure that our tanks are watertight. And so if we're making our tank out of a culvert, we want to make sure we've painted up those seams really well. If light gets into the tank, we're going to get algae. So we want to make sure that our tanks are light proof. So no light can basically shine through and access the water. The mosquito proof is very important. We don't want to be that neighbor that's causing a problem in the neighborhood. We want to make sure that our tanks have the right vector control. And also too, they got to be vented, because when that water is coming into the tank, the air has to release. So definitely it has to have an option for that. UV resistant on your plastic tanks, it'd be good to paint them. So just like your culvert style paint or tanks, you can paint them. There's a little more prep work. You're gonna have to do a little rough sanding and then use a paint that sticks to plastic. And then you can paint over that. And there again, you can get very creative with it, or you could just paint it to match your house or the block wall. But as I mentioned, you absolutely have to plan for an overflow. If you don't plan for that overflow, well, you're just asking for trouble. And these are a couple examples of overflows that I don't recommend. So I love the one there on the left, because I love examples, I love demonstrations. They labeled it overflow. But take a look at that pipe. The pipe coming in is 3-inch pipe. And this pipe coming out, I'd say it's 1.5 inches, maybe at best. So there again, what's going to happen when this tank fills up and we're getting just a deluge of rain? It's going to start finding the easier way of coming out, and it might be the slid or it might be up the rain head. Over in this photo, I like that they sized the overflow correctly. You got a 3-inch inflow and you got a 3-inch overflow. But where's that overflow going? Yeah, it's just going right down at the base of the tank. So that's not good, because over time, that's just going to erode away and cause problems. It's not directing the rainwater overflow where you would want it to go. And where do we want it to go? We want it to go out to our earthworks, into our basins. So get a pipe attached to the overflow. That's going to come down, underground, and pop up. Okay. So in this photo, so we have a filter. It's at the tank. And notice all those leaves are starting to collect there. So for maintenance, this is, it's hard to clean. It's hard to see. You're gonna have to get on a ladder, crawl up there and then clean that out. There is a rain head and a diverter, a first flush, but this little metalwork doesn't have the screen here. The screen is here. So if you can put the screens, the rain heads, where they're easy to clean, that's why I love this one. This is a great example of a rain head where you come out into the patio, you look right there as, oh, I got some debris on my rain head. You clean it right off. That's easy maintenance. If it's easy maintenance, well, that's maintenance I know I'm gonna do. If it's something that's really hard to do, I'm not likely gonna do it. It's kind of like that first flush, as I mentioned. If I don't empty them after each storm, then it's not doing any good. So the easier that we can maintain our systems, the better. And there is maintenance. So we want to check for the leaks. Is there any wet areas around the tank that shouldn't be there? You're gonna have to clean those gutters. And so gutters are, they don't make, just installing gutters doesn't make it an active system. The gutters, the waters can still passively flow through the gutter and out into the landscape, into your earthworks. Installing that rain tank makes it active, but gutters, you still gotta clean them. And you're gonna check your downspouts, you're gonna check your overflows, clear out any debris that you might have in there. Check to make sure no mosquitoes, that you got a problem with mosquitoes. Empty that first flush. And I do laugh on this one because I'm guilty as charged on the first flush. Now I use just my rainwater on the landscape. I don't use it for any drinking water. And when we installed the tank, I was pretty good about it the first year or so. Every rainstorm after that, I'd go and open up that cap and let the water run out. But then I got lazy and I stopped cleaning it out. Well, I still haven't had a problem with sediment in my tank. It's just bouncing out in the bottom of the tank. But so I only empty it out maybe once a year. So it's very important to have that rain head because that first flush has got water in it. So it's important to have that rain head to make sure I don't get any mosquitoes. And then clean out the bottom of that sediment. That's what I was mentioning. So we installed our rain tank back in 2010 as part of a watershed management group certification course here in the Valley. And I have not had to clean the sediment out of the tank. So it's been, well, it's been over 10 years in April. And that sediment is just kind of just balancing out and just doing its thing there. So, but if you get sediment that's over the supply line, you're going to get a lot of debris coming out of your supply line through your hose. You're going to start noticing it. If you have an irrigation system with filters, that's going to become a problem. So you're going to want to clean that out. And how do you clean it out? Well, it depends on your tank. For example, on the culvert style tank, we build in a 2-inch flush so you can empty it right out. On a plastic style tank, what you're going to do is you're going to use a shop vac and try to suck out any extra water and then clean it out the best that you can. So for winter preparation, well, we don't have to worry too much about it here in the Valley. Kind of the same thing as any of our exposed water pipes that we have. They're exposed, you're going to want to go ahead and cover them. If the water has room to expand when it freezes, it's less likely to crack something. But it's good to cover any exposed pipes and or drain the tank, especially if you're up in a colder climate where you're definitely getting below freezing level. You're going to want to try to insulate it so it doesn't freeze, or go ahead and drain and just winterize your tank. All right, so lots of information there. I just want to do a check-in. Charlie, is the sound coming over okay? Is it cutting out at all?
Quality for me is good. Yeah, you sound pretty clear.
Okay, sounds good. I just seen a poor connection pop up just a moment ago. So, all right. Well, so we're going to get into how large of rain tanks do I need? And oh, it's the answer I always hate to give, but it's so common because it does depend. Depends on what are you trying to do. And so, for example, maybe just a rain barrel setup. But does a rain barrel need to have a first flush, a rain head? Well, definitely it should have a rain head. First flush might be optional. But what size do you need? So when sizing tanks, so here in the Valley, well, and it depends on what part of the Valley that you live in too, but what's your average rainfall? And let's just say the 8 inches. And if we're trying to capture the monsoon rains of 4 inches and the winter rains of 4 inches, well, would I want to size my tank to capture 4 inches of rain? Well, maybe, and it depends. But I definitely want to capture at least 1 inch of cumulative rain, just to make it worth my investment and time to put a tank in. 2 inches is likely going to be better, and that's going to help you get through, as far as the storms, when we get our storm and the patterns, which also is going to depend on the year and where you're at in the Valley. And so tanks that capture 3 or 4 inches, it might be best, or it may not. You might be oversizing your tank to where it's not going to fill up to capacity because you're using that water before the storms. So a good resource that you have to check out. This is the Maricopa County's Flood Control District website. And the Flood Control District, they have gauges throughout the Valley. And so I recommend you go to their website, check out the rainfall data, find a gauge that's close to your area, and check out the history. So for example, this was pulled out of a gauge up by Glendale. Their average precipitation rate in 25 years is 7.22. Okay. So 7.22, that's their average. Then what I start to look at, I break it down into the year. So the yearly data, and I'm going to look at the totals for the month. So in October, there was 2.5 inches of rain. but in November it was 0.39, December 0.12, January 138. So I'm looking to see where are the patterns. So this 2.5, that's pretty good, and that 1.5, but the rest of the year, it wasn't meeting that. Then we look at 2015. Here again, we got about an inch, over an inch, and over an inch, but not too many times over 2 inches in that month. And in 2014, there's a 1.65, 1.73, 63. Oh, here's a 2 inch, and holy cow, there's 4.69 inches. That was that crazy September of 2014 when we just got downpoured. Now, I wouldn't want to size my tank for that one scenario. But what I am seeing is this 2 inch, the 1.75 inches. So that 1 to 2 inch is pretty common in a month. So if I want to capture all that rain in August and I'm using water, likely a 2 inch size tank is going to be fine. Okay, so our first activity. You received an email with an activity sheet. Should have received this. If you printed it out, that's great. If not, that's okay too. This is really going to be something for you to complete after class today. But I want you to go through the steps. I want you to understand how to be able to calculate your roof area and figure out how to size your tank. So for the rooftop, this formula, oh, I'm on the back side of your activity sheet on the second page. There's the formulas. So the potential harvested rainwater volume, that's what we're going to be using, and that's the catchment area. So the square foot of the roof, we're going to times that by 0.623. And then the runoff coefficient. And then how many inches of rain. So the square foot roof area, length times width, yep. That 0.623, where is that coming from? So 0.623, well, in 1 cubic foot, so imagine a box that's 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot, and I'm pouring water into that. It's going to overflow at 7.48 gallons. 7.48 gallons can fit into 1 cubic box. Okay. If I cut that box into 1 inch slices, so I have 12 1 inch slices. Each slice is 0.623 gallons. Okay, so the reason why I break it down into using 0.623 is I just simplified the math. Because now I know at 1 square foot, 1 inch thick is how many gallons? It's 0.623 gallons. So I can take any square foot area, times it by 0.623, and then the runoff coefficient, that's going to depend on what type of surface material. Is it metal, asphalt? Are you also, concrete? What are you capturing off of? And then the inches of rain. If I do 0.623, that's 1 inch already. So then I just have to times it by 6 if I got 6 inches of annual rain. Or if it's a 1/4 inch rainstorm, I just have to take my base value and I times it by 0.25 to get a 1/4 inch. So for the example, Cindy's cistern has 1,500 square feet of home with an asphalt shingle roof. And she wants to capture 4 inches of rain in her cistern. All right, so that's pretty aggressive. So it's 1,500 square feet, asphalt roof, and she wants to capture 4 inches of rain. So to complete the math, you got 1,500 times 0.623 times 0.9 times 4 equals 3,364 gallons. So to compromise, Cindy cistern, she's going to install two. She's going to install two 1,500 gallon tanks, one on each side of the home. It's going to reduce the amount of plumbing, so she's not having to run all this pipe from all around the house downspouts to one tank, so setting up separate tanks. And she's able to capture pretty darn close to that 4 inches of rain within the two cisterns. So I want to show just real quick, I'm going to stop sharing this screen. And let's see here. Let me share, this is the Maricopa County Assessor's Map. So the Maricopa County's assessor's map, this is a good tool to use. There's not much learning curve to it. There's definitely programs out there, computer drafting design programs like AutoCAD or SketchUp that you can use. But just to get a really rough, way of calculating a square foot area, I do a lot of my desktop assessments just by using the Maricopa County Assessor Maps and say SketchUp, which is the tool that I have. So for example, in the Maricopa County's Assessor's Map, you have measuring tools. And I want to measure to see how much of the south side of the roof, what is that square foot area? So I'm going to turn on the polygon tool. I'm going to turn on this show measurement tool, or measurement totals. And then I'm just going to click and I'm going to draw what I see as that roof area. Okay, so that one roof area is 826.4 square feet. So you could just call it 820 or 830. You can round it off. So we got 830 square feet of roof area. So when thinking about that, if we take that 830, we're going to times it by 0.623. That looks like an asphalt roof, so we're going to times it by 0.9. So off of a 830 square foot area, times by 0.623, that's the conversion from gallons, how many gallons in an inch, and then the runoff coefficient, the 0.9. So that's 465 gallons, just off that one roof area. So for 465 gallons, what size of tank would I put in? I'd put in at least a 465 gallon tank. Be better if it was probably 2-inch, like the 865 or something like that. So when looking at the roof areas, let me get back to the screen share. So use the Maricopa County's Assessor's Map, find your address, zoom in on it, use those measuring tools, map out your roof area that you want to capture, find out what that square footage is. And then once you know what that square footage is, then you can plug it in to find out how many gallons that you can capture. So now tanks may not meet the entire need of a backyard. So if your landscape needs more water, where's it going to come from? It's either going to come from our gray water or it's going to come from our tap. So do we have enough water? Do we need to decrease the amount of plants that we have? Or do we need to change out the type of plants that we're using to more low water use plants? So I want to give an example of the vegetable garden. So a vegetable garden uses about 40 gallons per square foot a year. So when adding that up, we can take our example for Gardener Greg has 5 by 10, so 5 foot by 10 foot garden. So that's going to be 50 square feet. We're going to times that by 40. So 40 gallons per square foot. So 5 by 10 by 40, that's going to be 2,000 gallons per year. Okay, and then we can just roughly break that into 2 seasons. So 1,000 gallons for one season and 1,000 gallons for the other, just as a rough breakout. Okay, but 2,000 gallons of water is going to be needed. Then, how many gallons were you able to capture? Were you able to capture 2,000 gallons of water throughout that year? And the water that you're capturing, is it at the right time of the year when your plants are going to need it? And so you can definitely calculate those discrepancies. You got how many gallons of rainwater? So you're figuring that out. How many gallons of rainwater can your cisterns hold per rainy season? How many gallons of water do your veggies need per season? And then how much water will be needed that cistern cannot provide, okay? And then you take all that and you figure out, well, am I over budget? Am I under budget? If I'm over budget, then I have to consider, do I reduce my plants or where am I getting that extra water from? If I'm under budget, well, what can I use that excess water for? That's where we can really get creative to aspire to. Maybe we could plumb it into our house or use it for other features. Figure out a good source for that water. Keep in mind you're wanting to use your rainwater as a beneficial purpose. Okay, so in week 1, we drew out our site. And so I'm not sure how many of you joined us for week 1, if you drew out your site plan or not. Today, if you're just joining us, I want you to think about your site. And I want you to draw your site out. And I want you to think about all, where are the property lines? Where are all the elements that fit within that property line? So when you draw, and it's always best to draw to scale. And if you have a scale like an engineering or an architectural scale, that's definitely a good tool to use. So that way when you're drawing, it is to scale. And you can use a grid paper. And so each little square, you could say 1 square is 10 feet, or 1 square is 5 feet, or however, what scale that you're using. But to draw to scale is good. And then start with the property lines, draw those out. The reason why I always start with the property lines is so that way I can get the right scale. If I just start drawing a house, I run out of room on my paper. So draw the property lines first, then draw everything on the inside. So your house structure, draw any other permanent structures. So for example, do you have any storage sheds? Does your neighbor have a carport that drains right into your yard? So if so, mark that down, because that's a water resource that you have that you get to use, and you can thank your neighbor for that extra water. But be sure that you're using it as a beneficial purpose. Note down any existing trees and shrubs that you have, and be sure to mark the direction on your plan. Because as you notice, on this plan, north is at the bottom. I know that's not how Google or Bing Maps, north is usually on top unless you rotate it around, but north doesn't have to be on top. It has to be noted which direction is true north. So if, when you're looking at down bird's eye view at your home and your property, draw it how you see it. And then just be sure to mark it. North, you can also mark south, east, and west if you want to, but you definitely want to mark so that way you know what direction. You want to know where the sun's, which is the sunshine, which is the shade side. Okay, where's the winter sun, where's the summer sun? Those are important. So once you get that all drawn out, what we want to do is start thinking about placement. Where does the tanks go? So for example, if I was adding a cistern for the backyard catchment, I could add a gutter along this roof area here, and then place a tank right here, which is what we ended up doing. But also could have placed the tank back over here in this corner. That's where our compost is. So that wasn't a good fit. I could put it over here if I wanted to. However, this corner is the highest part of the watershed at the landscape level. So this is, I know from this corner all the way to that corner, there's about it's a slight elevation change, but it's a little bit higher here. So when thinking about placement, if you can place your tanks that are stacking functions, can it cast a shadow on the house at the right time of day? Can it be placed to create a breezeway to direct that wind? Use it as it's vertical, use it as a trellis. How many things can you do with that rain tank? So what we can do, I'm gonna share this screen again. Back to the assessor's map. Okay. So, for example, this house, and I just randomly pulled this one out. We can go to another, let's go to another one here. And I'm going to delete this. Okay. This one's good. This one's got a lot of different roof angles. Which direction is that water shedding from? But this backyard has a big roof area that looks like it could get captured from. So what I'll do is I'm gonna figure out the square foot area. Okay. I get my tool to work here. Okay, got that. Okay, so all together, this roof is about 1,361 square feet. So we could say it's right close to 1,350, 1,360. Now this is a good point when thinking about size of pipe. So when the square foot area is above 1,200 to 1,500, it's kind of that, do I use 3-inch pipe or 4-inch pipe? So anything above 1,500, a 4-inch pipe is better. And well, more and more square foot, you might have to go up to 6-inch. But from a couple hundred square feet up to 1,200 and typically up to 1,500 square feet, that 3-inch pipe is going to be fine. And then, so on this scenario here, 1,360, 3-inch pipe, and your pipe style. So you're going to have choices in your pipe for plumbing your rain tanks. The 3 choices, there's the really inexpensive, there's the moderately expensive, and then there's the expensive. And of course, they all have different, well, qualities to them. So the least expensive, the styrene pipe, it's a very thin wall pipe. And it's got some bend to it. It's going to, well, over time, it's likely it's going to crack, and especially if it's exposed above the surface, it wants to deteriorate quicker than other pipe quality that you'll find where the PVC DWV pipe, that's PVC drain waste vent pipe, that has a foam core. Okay, that foam core, it's better than the styrene. It's a little more expensive than the styrene, but it's a heavier grade PVC. It's a Schedule 40 PVC pipe, but it's got that foam core, so it's a little lighter. Then you have the solid core. This is your pressurized Schedule 40 PVC pipe that if you're using potable water, definitely that would be your choice. If you're going to drink, you want to keep the system potable all the way through. And so the best material that you could use, the heaviest duty, of course, would be that Schedule 40 solid core PVC pipe. Then the next down would be your PVC drain waste vent pipe that's got a foam core. And both of those pipes would work well for above ground and definitely below ground, but they're going to need to be painted. So any exposed PVC pipe, you want to make sure that you paint it up, and so that way protected against the UV rays, and that it can last a good long time for you. So when picking your pipe and your fittings based on budget, where is it going to be located? Is it underneath pathways, things like that? I tend to always personally want to go towards the heaviest grade, the Schedule 40 solid core, because I want, my tank is 25 years is what they put on to the plastic tanks, and my metal tank is, we're guessing maybe around 50 years. But the pipe, I don't want it to fail before the tank does. Okay. So think about your pipe and your material when installing. So on this house, a 1,300 square foot area, I'm going to use 3-inch pipe. And where could I place a rain tank? Well, I could put one over here and get that water to convey over. I could take that tank and I could put it out over here in this corner. Or if I wanted to, I could put it over in this corner. Okay. So I could put the tanks anywhere where I'd want them so that they're, well, one, I want them to be aesthetically pleasing, so placed in the landscape to where they're not causing any interference for traffic patterns or reducing the amount of space that you have to walk through. So you want them in an area that's going to be, easy to access, easy to fit within your design. And so, for example, let's go to another house. Okay. So for example, on this house, it's a smaller roof, smaller landscape. So you may place your tanks here in the corners. You might end up placing your tank right next to the side of it. Okay. So where can you best place your tanks? And that's going to depend. So if you can place your tank up near the house, that's fine, especially if you can use it, as I mentioned, as an extra architectural feature. But I do like the advantage of having a wet install, so that way the tank doesn't have to be right by the house. For example, in our tank, it's only 7 feet away from the house. So technically, I could have done a pipe that comes from the roof right over to the tank, but it's on my patio roof. And that patio roof is lower than the rest of the roof. So since the patio roof is lower, and if I had this pipe coming over, I felt like I'd be hitting it with tools, coming through. It had been at 6'4". I'm 5'9". So I know I wouldn't hit my head on it, but 6'4" on a pipe, that seemed too low. So it's better to go underground and over to that 7-foot area into the tank. So you decide on how you best want to get your water into the tank, and as far as your different dry or wet installations. When thinking about placing tanks, where do you live? And does the city that you live in let you install storage sheds in your front yard? Okay, so a storage shed in your front yard. That's the same as a water tank, as long as it's under 5,000 gallons and there's no electricity to it, is what they treat it as. So if you call up planning and development at the city and say, well, I want to install a rain tank, and they're likely going to ask you, well, how many gallons is it? And if it's under 5,000, it's okay, is there going to be any electricity running to it? And that's no, then they say, okay, you'll treat it as a storage shed. And your storage shed, it has to be placed so many feet off of the wall. There's certain requirements for setbacks, and they may say you cannot install a storage shed in your front yard. And so there would be your answer, can I put a rain tank in my front yard? If they allow a storage shed, then yes, but if not, then no. There again, if you install like a small little rain barrel and you cover it and screen it and it's not visible, it's likely no one's going to ask anything about it. But it's just doing being a good neighbor. They're not wanting to see, say, a 2650 tanks right in the middle of the front yard. So thinking about that. So it's more likely that you're going to be capturing that rainwater in the backyard. Now you may be able to gutter your front part of the house and direct that water to the back area to a rain tank. So how can you get creative with gutters and to get that and downspouts and pipe to get the water where you need it to go? All right. Stop sharing that. Okay, so you've been thinking about where you're going to be placing your rain tanks? Have you been getting a lot of questions thinking about where, how, and what am I going to do? Well, this would be a good time to ask those questions. All right, so Charlie, do we have any questions?
We do have a few questions. First question is about first flushes. Are first flushes required?
Okay, so first flushes, are they required? Well, technically, no, they're not required. Are they a good thing? Absolutely, they are a good thing to have. But when it comes to first flushes, if I don't empty them, then I might as well not install it. So that's over time, that's kind of what we've learned as far as these first flushes. Are they going to be are you connecting your tank to an irrigation system? Are you going to drink the water? If the answer is yes to either one of those, definitely a first flush. And you're going to want to size your first flush in order to capture enough of that roof water to make sure it's clean. So you're going to want to size it appropriately. But if you're not going to drink your water and you're not using it with an irrigation system, then that first flush is optional. And I personally wouldn't install it if unless it was going to be drinking or using it with irrigation. However, if you have the space to put in a first flush and you are going to consistently empty it after the storms, then you're just saving that much debris from going into the tank and likely over having to do more maintenance in the long run. So the answer to your question is they are optional, but they are a good thing to have if you're going to drink your water or use it with any filtration. Yeah, good question.
Great. And why fill your rain tank from the bottom rather than the top? Or can you talk about why having the inflow at the bottom or the top of a rain tank, what the difference is?
Yeah, okay. So a couple of things. So what's the benefit of having the inflow at the bottom of the tank or the top of the tank? So if I'm understanding the question correctly, I just want to state right off the bat, the only time where the water would come in from the bottom of the tank is if you're building a culvert style tank. Okay, and that's where you're going to put the plumbing all in the concrete and it pops up inside the tank. Okay. Now, if you're using a plastic tank, the bulkhead's going to be up towards the top. You're not going to want to drill a hole in the bottom of the tank and put a bulkhead there for the inflow because of the overflow. What happens if you go too low on your inflow and then you have a pipe that's connected for your overflow, you might get this siphon effect that will then basically cause the overflow to drain your tank. So the best thing to do is, if you're using a plastic style tank, is use the bulkheads up towards the top and have the inflow come in, and then the overflows at the top. Now, there's one other part where I was talking about plastic tanks, and that is to connect them at the bottom. So if I'm daisy chaining plastic tanks together, then I can connect them at the bottom of one. So tank number one connected to tank number two at the bottom, both of those tanks will be able to fill up and drain, okay? If I don't connect them at the bottom, then I'm going to have two supply lines on both tanks. And that's just a little bit more work. You're going to have two hose bibs, you're moving your hose around. So it's just best to connect them at the bottom. So I'm not sure if I understood your question correctly, but overall, when you're flowing the water into the tank, coming underneath and inside the tank if it's a culvert style tank, but besides that, you're going to come up and to the top of the tank if it's a plastic style tank.
And what would be a disadvantage of going through the top with a culvert, or why wouldn't you do that?
Oh, yeah. So on a culvert tank, is there a disadvantage on going through the top than the bottom? No, there's no disadvantage. Going through the top, it could be a dry feed into a culvert style tank. However, cutting a hole through that galvanized metal is challenging. So then do you put a hole through the lid and then get it to drop down, through the lid? And then you got to take that off to get, if you had to take the lid off to service for anything. So typically, even though you can go in the top of a culvert style, we typically will plumb them in from the bottom anyways, but you can definitely install it in the top, either cutting a hole through that galvanized material, or you cut a hole through the lid and then you get your bulkhead installed there.
Great. And how much pressure is there per each foot of water in a tank?
Yeah, so I was trying to remember that. I think it's 0.48 PSI. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just under a half PSI. So if it's a 10-foot tall tank, you got about 5 PSI. 5 pounds per square inch.
And what is that
I
compared
remember
to?
correctly. I think it's
Compared to city water?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Comparing that to the pressure from like the city water. What
Oh,
are
yeah.
you looking at?
So comparing the head pressure from the rain tank to city water. So city water is going to be, gosh, probably anywhere from 40 up to 90 PSI, depending on where you're at. But typically the pressure coming into, say, your house, you're going to regulate around 50 PSI. When doing irrigation systems for drip irrigation, you're going to put on pressure regulators at maybe 25 to 30 PSI. So we're talking 5 PSI at a 10-foot tank. So it's very low pressure. And that gets into when trying to irrigate with a rain tank with low pressure using that gravity flow. So the shorter that your hose is that you're using, the better. So the least friction that you can have is going to be the best. Because the more friction, that's going to slow the water down. And when the tank's almost empty, you may not get anything out of a 100-foot hose. So definitely with the gravity, if you can lift it up, elevate a little bit more, but then also there are solutions for gravity using some really low flow. There is some low flow drip tape that can work at 5 PSI. So you can try different things using little drip emitters that are regulated, or better yet, you could use open ball valves, like what we use for our laundry landscape system. And then you can control those to how much water is getting released. Because with gravity, the larger the hole, the larger the port, it's going to be less friction.
Great. We have a few more questions. Good questions coming in.
All right.
So, someone asked what the source for finding the rainfall you used was, that online source.
Yes, that's the Maricopa County Flood Control District. It's their website. So the Flood Control District of Maricopa County, I think, is the official name. And there's going to be I think the button's the rainfall data, if I remember right. And then that's going to open up a map. And when you find that map, zoom into close to where you live, and then click on, some options there on the side, so you start seeing the gauge areas. Pick on the one that you are closest to, and then you can download the history from there.
Great. And then someone missed in their notes, there was a formula with the 0.9 for the roof runoff. They were asking for you to just share a little, like kind of repeat that. And what was the type of roof? And were there any other inputs or materials to consider?
Yes, okay, that's a really good question. And it's so good that I added it to your activity sheet. So you do have it. So that way you can use it for as a resource, because there's different types of material. So for example, the roofs that we were given in that scenario were asphalt. And so the asphalt roof is about a 0.9. Even a metal roof, I don't give it 100%, I give it a 0.95. And when we look at, like, for example, paving, 0.9, but bare soil, when we look at the coefficient for bare soil, it's 0.2 to 0.75, because think about it, that's going to absorb soil before it starts to run off. So the basic thing to remember about the coefficients is that you're not going to get 100% of what you think that you might get when you do those calculations, because roof material is going to absorb a little bit before it starts to shed. And so different materials is going to absorb more than others. And so that's why with a metal roof, I still do a 0.95, but asphalt a 0.9. But then we start breaking it down. If you're harvesting off, for example, capturing water into earthworks and you're calculating landscape runoff, then you're going to see it's going to be a lot lower, because that surface material is going to soak in before it runs off.
And then we have someone who stacked 2 45-gallon tanks and linked them together. Now they're having trouble getting water to flow down to the bottom. What would be causing this? Could this be caused by a vacuum?
Ooh, yeah. Well, this is a good question. So you got 2 45-gallon tanks stacked on top of each other. and you have water flowing from the top to the bottom. And it's not flowing from the top to the bottom. Boy, definitely airlock could be a possibility, or any other blockage. You know, is there anything clogging up the pipes? What are your pipe sizes? But definitely airlock was the first thing that came to mind, if it's not flowing from one to the other. Yeah, but I'd have to know a little bit more of how that system is put together to be able to give better advice on that.
Great. We might get back to that question then. And then why not just simply use a pump and pump the water out of a barrel or a tank and attach that to a hose?
Yeah, why not use a pump? So pumps are definitely a good option. However, when you start getting into pumps, you're going to get into more complexity. So it just depends if you want to go down that road or not. And adding in pumps, if you're going to pump that water out into a hose, you could use just a very basic, dirty pump. So you could use very basic, and you could get very elaborate when it gets to pumps. So you can plumb it into your irrigation system with the right filtration, and you can get devices that can communicate to what your water level is in your tank. So that way it knows to pull water from the tank or switch over to the potable water. So there's definitely lots of flexibility that you get when you pressurize your system versus using gravity.
And jumping back to the barrels that are stacked, it's both barrels fill up, but when the top one drains, he has to pump the bottom one.
The top one drains, but he has to pump the water out of the bottom one.
Let's see. I'll go back to that question. There might be a few edits going.
Because the first thing that I think of there is, what's the height of this trying to water? So if it's a raised bed and it's higher than that barrel, gravity can't flow.
But
the first.
I guess the bottom tank drains, but then he has to pump the top tank.
Oh. Yeah, I'm not quite visualizing that setup. Yeah, because gravity, if there's water in that top tank, and if it's not plugged or it's not airlocked, water should come out. What are you using for a supply line? So how are you trying to get the water out? Yeah.
Great. Another question. Are tile roofs a 0.9 coefficient?
Yeah, 0.9, they're going to absorb a little water. But yeah, 0.9 or 0.85.
Great. And why not use the metal gutter for transporting the water versus PVC? What's the reason?
Okay, read the question again, Charlie.
Let me look it up again. So the question was, wouldn't you use regular gutter pipe or why not use regular gutter pipe instead of PVC? And I think it's for the inflow, like using it as an inflow and an outflow, just for the whole system.
Gotcha. Okay, so why not use gutter all the way for the inflow versus switching to a PVC pipe from the gutter to the inflow, if I'm understanding it correctly? So a couple things there is, one is that I really want to get a rain head attached right underneath where the gutter outlet is. And once we attach that rain head, now we're switching over from a rectangle or maybe a round metal downspout to a PVC pipe. And then it's going to be for overhead, to get it to go in to the tank, what I'd like to use is a bulkhead. And that bulkhead is basically, it's attaching from the inside of the tank to the outside of the tank, and it gives you an option to screw on another piece of pipe or glue in some pipe. So by using the PVC pipe, we're also connecting our the inflow from the rain head to the rain tank itself. And I like to use a flex coupling right when I connect it to the tank. So that way, if the tank starts to swell when it gets full or expand, then it's got a little bit of movement in that flex coupling. So if I was using just the PVC, or I'm sorry, if I was just using the metal gutter downspout from the gutter and the downspout over to the tank, it's either going to be rectangular round. If it's an overhead, you might be able to successfully do it, get a good seal. I don't want to get any sunlight. That's why I like using those bulkheads. I don't prefer going into the top of the tank. I prefer going into the sides of the tank. So I won't say you cannot do it with the metal downspout as long as it's overhead. But if it's underground, it has to be glued in pipe, because you don't want any, like for example, the downspout pipes or downspout metal tubings or the rectangle tubing that they use, there's a seam in it and it's not meant to hold water. And so it's not going to be watertight. It's just meant for conveying water. So I'm sure you can get creative and figure out how to get that metal downspout over to the tank. But if you're installing it with a rain head and a bulkhead, your PVC pipe is going to be the best solution.
And through the questions. One other question, in some of your photos you had for the inflow, there was a slight slope to the PVC pipe kind of running against the wall. Was that slope part of the design, or is that just normal?
Yeah, so if it's a dry install and I want the water to flow over to the tank, yep, having a slight slope to that pipe is just going to help that water move and gravity. So just like with your gutter, there's going to be a slight slope to that gutter to get the water to move. Now, when you're doing an underground, so a wet install, you're going to be going down underground, and at that point, the slope doesn't matter because you're creating basically if you can imagine a hose that you're filling full of water, it's not going to matter because you're going down and up. So, but if it's just gravity flow and you want that water to gravity flow into the top of your tank, having a little bit of slope to that pipe is good.
Great. And I think those are the majority of the questions. There's one that I'm having a little trouble interpreting. It might be easiest to communicate by email, maybe touch base with Ryan if there are more detailed questions. So yeah, those are all the questions. Ryan, do you have anything else to add?
Well, I do, and I just want to point out, yeah, definitely for any questions, you have my email address there, especially the person that's got that stackable tank. I'm really curious what you got there. Send me an email, send me some photos. I'd be happy to chat with you about that. And yeah, I do have some questions that just a little bit of a kind of a quiz at the end and see, let's see how we did. So, all right, Charlie, go ahead and pop up those polling questions.
Yeah.
All right. So you should see this polling question on your screen. Does adding gutters to my water harvesting system make it an active system? All right, I'll just give you a few more seconds. So adding gutters, does it make it an active system, or is it not an active system? Just adding gutters. All right, let's see the polling coming in. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so 73% said no. And that's the correct answer. However, the 27% that said yes, you're actually, well, kind of true too, because I got to clean those gutters. So that's still an activity I have to do. If I don't clean those gutters, it's going to cause a problem. It's going to, start to, might plug up at the outlet of the gutter. So it doesn't make it an active system just installing gutters, but you've got to remember to clean your gutters. So that was a good one. All right, let's go ahead and pop up the next question. Okay. All right, so planning an overflow on a rain tank. Is that necessary? Yep, planning that overflow. Right, seeing the numbers come in. Okay, yep, planning an overflow. Because you got to think about it. When that water comes into the rain tank and you're using that water, but then more water is coming in that tank, you're using water. But what if the tank fills up? All right, so what do we got for the results? Very good. Yep, 91%. So you always want to plan for an overflow. So an overflow is definitely necessary. Yep. Okay.
Great.
All right. So the question that you should see on your screen, can 0.623 gallons of water fill a 1-inch square foot area 1 inch deep? And 0.623 gallons of water fill a 1 square foot area 1 inch deep. Now that 0.623, what I like about that number is it's also one of our area codes in the Valley too. So it should be an easy one to remember, 623. We just got to put a point on it. And that, and remember, 0.623, you can times that by any square foot area, and you'll know how many gallons in a 1 inch rain event. All right, go ahead and let's see what we got for the poll there. Very good. Yep, 88%. Yes, it will fill up that 1 square foot area 1 inch deep. Okay. And then remember, a cubic foot, so 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot is 7.48 gallons. I just took 7.48 gallons and divided it by 12, and that's how I got 0.623. So it just makes it for easier math. But all right. Well, good job, everyone. I really appreciate your time, and definitely if you have any questions, please reach out and let me know. Watershed Management Group's information's on there as well. Please reach out to us if you have questions. That's what we're here for. As educators, we want to share our knowledge. And I just would definitely, if you have any questions or thoughts, please drop me an email. And I want to thank you all for your time. All right, thank you.
And I just want to take this time to thank Ryan for your presentation. And I want to, give a shout out to our sponsors, and those are Phoenix Smart Water, EPCOR, Salt River Project, and Central Arizona Project. We hope we get to see you next week, next Wednesday at 5:30 for the next Hydrate class. I believe it's Hydrate Your Soils next week.
It is, yeah.
And also check out the WMG website events calendar. We have our virtual field studies, which are more in depth on other topics other than these Hydrate series, and also our special events coming up, the Monsoon Festival, and Monsoon Film Festival, and the Homescape Harvest Tour, which is virtual this year. And thanks everyone for joining us. Cool. All right, just the two of us.
All right. Let's see.
Very nice. Very nice.
Well, thank you. I'm trying to figure out, oh, there it is. I pinned my video. All right.